Now we're going to start back in Genesis tonight with the story of Abraham and Sarah, and this is their genealogy laid out here on the board. Now we know that Abraham started out as Abram. I didn't put that up there. And Sarah started out as Sarai. And I didn't put that up there. God changed both their names. He called Abram. He called Sarai, Sarah. This is in conjunction. That's the only two incidences that I can think of in the Bible. God changes other people's names. He changes Jacob's name, but it's the only incident that I can think of where God changed a woman's name. And he changes Sarah's name, or Sarai's name, to Sarah. And that all has significance that it's not necessary to go into tonight. So Abraham and Sarah, are barren. And as a result of their barrenness, in Genesis chapter 17, God gave the promise to Abraham in Genesis 15 that he was going to have a son. But he didn't give him really any details about it. But he believed God. Regardless, he believed God. It was counted to him for righteousness. Well, as he ages and as Sarah ages, Sarah begins to think, this is, it can't be me. So she sets up for Hagar. Now, where did Hagar come from in the story? Well, in Genesis chapter 13, there's a famine in the land. And as a result of the famine, Abraham goes down to Egypt. And then he comes back after the famine. And while he's there, all kinds of things happen that are not really good. Lot, Sodom, Gomorrah happened there. Lot's tagging along, and Lot really shouldn't be tagging along according to Genesis chapter 12. Genesis chapter 14, there's a war. The only really good thing that comes out of that is that Melchizedek shows up. That's Genesis 14. Then Genesis 15 is the promise. And then we have this mess with Hagar in Genesis chapter 16, where Hagar is introduced, and Hagar gives birth to a son, Ishmael. He's 13 years older than Isaac. 13, the number of rebellion, interestingly, in the Bible. Isaac is 13 years older. Ishmael is 13 years older than Isaac. Now, we're going to drop Ishmael here because he doesn't come important to the rest of our story, but just to give you an idea of where Ishmael is today, that's the Arab nations. They all come from Ishmael. So when you hear about these wild men, and the Bible told, God said to Hagar, your son will be a wild man. You know what he'll do? He'll strap bombs to himself and blow himself up. That's Ishmael. So anytime you read in the news or hear on the TV about any of the Arabs, you say, well, there's Ishmael showing up again. Well, we'll drop them there. Because we want to come over here and pick up Abraham and Sarah, and they have Isaac. I should have Jacob down here. I've messed that up. Let me fix it. Whatever I've done with it. Oh, there it is. It's always disappeared from me. So I need to put Esau. I'll just do it this way to make it simple. I'll put Esau here. Okay? Does that make it clear to everybody? These two go together. So they have Isaac and Ishmael, and then Isaac is born. And Genesis chapter, that jumps us ahead to Genesis chapter 23, 24. Sarah dies in chapter 23 of Genesis. Chapter 24, Rebekah finds Isaac. Abraham sends his servant to go find Isaac. It's the longest chapter in the book of Genesis. And there's a bride found for Isaac, and her name is Rebekah, and they then have two sons, and that's Esau and Jacob are born. Now, where does Esau show up? We're going to drop Esau because he's not part of the story. But Esau becomes the Edomites, and they are today in modern day Jordan. Jordan's a little different from all the other Arabs, and that's because they come from two different lines. Jordan has always been, at least in modern day history, a little more open to the Jews and welcoming to the Jews. There's been a peace between Jordan and Israel for years and years and years, and that king seems to be a little more sensible than the rest. I don't know what it'd be like to live in Jordan. It might be quite unbecoming if you were to live there, but at least on the outside looking at Jordan, it seems to be like a place where, well, I could go and survive there. But the Edomites come from there, Jordan comes from there, and now we drop them off the scene because we want to focus on Jacob. Jacob is the second son of Isaac. We know that Esau was born first, and he sold his birthright. And because he sold his birthright for a bowl of pottage, God says, this is what God says, I can't really explain it. It says in the book of Malachi, Jacob have I loved, and Esau have I hated. Now, who said that? God said that. So I didn't think God hated anybody. Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. Now just stand there and meditate on that for a while. And when you figure it out, you can let me know. I don't really grasp it. I just salute it and go on, okay? So you have Isaac and Jacob. Now Jacob has 12 sons, and this is where it gets a little convoluted because it starts in Genesis chapter 29 and carries on through Genesis chapter 30. And he's having these kids like bunny rabbits. This kid after kid after kid after kid. Now the first 4 are born to Leah. So Leah has Rachel, because Jacob loved Rachel, God shut up her womb so she couldn't have any children. And he makes Leah fruitful. And because she's fruitful, she just has child after child after child. 4 children really in a row. How quickly? Well, I would imagine pretty quickly. About every year, I would imagine she's having a child. The Bible doesn't give us the time frame of how old the children were. It just gives us the birth order. Reuben is the firstborn. We'll talk about Reuben tonight. Reuben's the firstborn. Then comes Simeon, Levi, and Judah. And these 4 are born really in a row, okay? Then the Bible says that God withheld Leah from having any more children. And so Rachel, because she's barren, says, well, maybe I can just get my handmaid to get involved in this. And so Jacob, this is like a soap opera. It really is. Jacob is approached by Rachel, and she says, hey, how about you go down and have some intimate relationships with my handmaid? Now, have you ever wondered what Jacob thought about that? Well, he may have said, okay, well, honey, if that's really what you want, you know, if you're going to insist. Now, we don't know what the dynamics were. We don't know what the conversation is. The Bible sometimes just leaves that open for you to just sort of fill in the blanks. But I can have some real fun with that in my imagination. So Rachel goes to Jacob. It wasn't Jacob's idea. It was Rachel's idea. Well, why don't you take Bilhah? And so Bilhah has 2 sons, Dan and Naphtali. So now we have Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, and Naphtali. These are half-brothers now, right? They're half-brothers. So when Leah sees that Rachel, her sister, of course, they're rivals, you know it's dynamic enough to just have a husband and you be 2 sisters. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that as a man having two sisters as your wives? We can't imagine having wives, much less having wives who are sisters. Because sisters, while it's really a bipolar kind of deal, because sisters can be really close, but they can fight like cats. And so you have this dynamic here of rivalry, envying. Rachel's envious of Leah because she can have children and she can't. So then when Rachel circumvents this and says, well, I can't have any children, I'll just bring my handmaid into it. Leah says, well, 2 can play that game. And so Leah says to Jacob, why don't you take Zilpah? And Jacob goes, a man's got to do what he's got to do. And so he goes with Zilpah and has two more kids, Gad and Asher. And Leah's naming them, right? When Rachel has these through Bilhah, Bilhah doesn't name them, Rachel names them. So they are surrogate type of moms, the biological mom, but Rachel names the kids. Same with Leah, with Zilpah. Zilpah gives birth, and she's their mama, but biological mama, but Leah is the surrogate mom. So she names them. One of these guys are born. So we got Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. When one of these guys are born, it says, behold, a troop cometh. You got 4, 6, 8 boys. Now, somewhere in here, Leah has a girl, and her name is Dinah. She comes in important later in Genesis 34. She becomes part of the story. So Jacob has 13 children. There's a good trivia question for you. How many children did Jacob have? Most people are going to say 12, but he had 13. 12 boys. Okay, so now here's what we got in this family. Ready? We got 4 full brothers. We got 4 half brothers. And these are half brothers from these. Right? It's all the same dad, but now 3 different moms. And then the Lord steps in and says, okay, I'm going to open Rachel's womb again. No. I'm going to open Leah's womb again, and she's going to have, and this all happens too because Reuben is out, I'll come to that in a minute. So Issachar and Zebulun are born. Issachar and Zebulun are born. So now we got 10 kids, and then Reuben is out, and he's getting some mandrakes. He comes back with mandrakes. He's probably older now, right? He's out on his own. He's collecting these plants, and when he comes in, that does fit into the story because when he comes in, Rachel says, I want your son's mandrakes. And she says, well, the only way you can have the mandrakes is if you let Jacob sleep with me tonight. Now, doesn't that give you the idea, at least? Remember, Rachel's his favorite. He's not afraid about it. He never wanted to marry Leah. He wanted to marry Rachel. And Laban, the daddy of Leah and Rachel, tricked him. On the wedding night, he goes in, and of course it's Jewish tradition, there's no lights. It's dark. And he has his first night with his wife, who he thinks is Rachel. And the next morning when he wakes up, here's what the Bible says. And behold, it was Leah. And then he goes and says, what have you done to me? You've tricked me out. And he says, let me tell you how this works here in our country. In our country, it's only right that the firstborn be married first. You ever wonder why Jacob didn't say that? Say anything? Because he stole the birthright. Stole it. He took the responsibility of the firstborn, so therefore he has to take the responsibility of the firstborn. But back to my story, Reuben comes in with these mandrakes, and Rachel says, give me those mandrakes. And she says, well, the only way this is going to happen is if you let Jacob come, and then she has 2 sons. But then Rachel's, I don't think it's got anything to do with the mandrakes, but Rachel's womb is open, and then she has 2 more children. She has Joseph and Benjamin. And in the story with Benjamin, of course, she dies in childbirth. And Benjamin means the son of my right hand. Who's his right hand? Rachel. Rachel's always his favorite. Now here's something about the character of Jacob. Jacob then is called Israel after this event. He says, no longer will your name be Jacob. Jacob means deceiver, fraud, cheat. God says you're not going to be that any longer. After many trials and years and wrestling with the angel and limping for the rest of his life and going through all the hardships that he went through, the scare with Esau coming back, after all this time, God says, I'm going to name you Israel because you are a prince with God. Israel means prince. And so when we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, these are who we're talking about. These sons. These 6 are full brothers. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun. These 2 are full brothers. Joseph and Benjamin. These 2 are full brothers, but half brothers to everybody else. Dan and Naphtali. And these 2 are full brothers, but half brothers to everybody else. Gad and Asher. Any questions about that? Any questions? Now you already knew that from reading Genesis, but that gives you at least a visual, except for my little conundrum here. That gives you a visual of what is going on, and that sets up for us what's going to be taking with all the 12 tribes of Israel. And we're going to take each of the tribes and talk about them individually as what the Bible reveals about them. And as we learn these things about these 12 tribes, it's going to give us some insight to what God has done, is doing, and shall be doing, particularly in the future days. Okay, so this is connected to the future. People get sometimes discouraged in reading the Bible, thinking, well, I'm just reading history, and I'm not much into history, and it's pretty boring. But what we don't realize that much of what we're reading in the Old Testament is prophecy for the future. And that's certainly true in this regard. So let's take Reuben first. Reuben is going to take remember the story? He's going to take his land on the east side of Jordan. When we went through that lesson last week of the trip that the children of Israel took. If you missed that, you can watch it on video. But the trip they took down through the wilderness up past Mount Sinai, all the way around. Finally, they get into the promised land after 40 years in the wilderness. And as they're coming down to Jordan, Reuben says, I'm going to stay on this side of Jordan, on this side. So as they're coming down, they have much cattle, and it's just wonderful pasture land. And Reuben goes to Moses and says, hey, we'd really like to stay on this side. And Moses says, what are you doing? What are you talking about? How are we going to do this? You're going to discourage all the other tribes from going in, just like it happened 40 years ago, and we can't have that happen again. And Reuben says, no, you don't understand. We're just going to build booths here for our cattle and homes for our families. Once we've built those homes and those families, then we intend to go over and fight till everyone's got their inheritance, and then we'll come back and receive this inheritance. And Moses says something that's a great verse in the Bible that will make your hair stand up. It says this, be sure your sin will find you out. So here's Reuben. It's on the east side of Jordan. He says, no, we'll go in. And so they do go in. And then when Jacob is about to die, in Genesis chapter 49, he calls all these children around him, and he's going to name each one of them. He starts with his firstborn. He starts with Reuben. That's in Genesis 49:3 if you're there. Reuben, thou art my firstborn. My might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, the excellency of power. Isn't that great? I mean, that's all positive. So Reuben has a lot of things going for him. Might, strength, dignity, power, and even some adjectives there to really make it stronger than just it is. But, verse 4, unstable as water thou shalt not exhale, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed. Then defilest thou it. He went up to my couch. Now, what did Reuben do? Well, it tells you earlier in the book of Genesis that he slept with one of the handmaids. Bilhah slept with him. And Jacob never forgot it. Never forgot it. So now he's on his deathbed. This is his deathbed. This is his last will and testament. And that's the last thing he says about him. Now turn to Numbers chapter 33. With all the, Deuteronomy 33, I'm sorry. Deuteronomy 33. With all the positive things that he said, he sort of leaves, I guess, a bad taste in your mouth. You know, your dad says, man, you're excellent, full of strength, full of dignity, full of power, you're eloquent, but that last thing he says. Now, in Deuteronomy 33, verse 6, let Reuben live and not die, and let not his men be few. And the next one he mentions is Judah. So Moses goes from Reuben to Judah, then backs up and gets Levi. We'll talk more about that when we come to it. We talk about Moses' blessings. Now, one thing that Reuben did, as I said, is he went in and helped settle the land. He did not just stay there on the other side of Jordan, even though it was the best land for him. He did say, stay, and as Moses says here, he grew and grew and grew and became one of the great tribes of all the nation of Israel. That didn't happen to everybody. Simeon, in fact, as we'll see, his population drops about half from the first counting in Numbers to the last counting in Numbers. It's almost half the population. Nearly 20,000 people die in Simeon, and Reuben stays about the same, increases a little bit. So God says, through Moses, I want him to grow bigger and bigger and bigger. So, you know, even though if he sinned in Genesis 49:4, he can still be blessed. That's the lesson for us, spiritual lesson for us is that even though we may have something in our past, and we all do, we all may have something in our past that we regret and we wish we hadn't done, God can still bless you and will bless you. Of course, it depends upon our repentance and our way of life. Look at Judges chapter 5. Here's another mention of him. And as I said earlier, this is Deborah. After Deborah has won that decisive battle, and she mentions the tribes as well. And in Genesis chapter 15, 5:15, it says, and the princes of Issachar were with Deborah, even Issachar, and also Barak. He was sent on foot into the valley. For the divisions of Reuben, there were great thoughts of heart. Why abodest thou among the sheepfolds to hear the blessings or the bleatings of the flocks? For the divisions of Reuben, there was great searchings of heart. Now, the last thing you want to do, I would imagine, I've never been in battle, but I would imagine the last thing you want to do if you're leading a troop or you're in a troop and you're going into battle is to have an indecisive leader. History's full of them. Where if they just taken the high ground, as could have happened in Gettysburg, had the South taken the high ground, had down here in Savannah, had they just taken the high ground, kept the high ground, then they could have won the war. Indecisive leadership is always terrible, and so Reuben in this battle was indecisive. Great searchings of heart. Why were you down there listening to the sheep bleating? Why were you taking care of the animals when we're in a war for our lives and you're just down there, meandering about? So, again, that describes Reuben. Remember what Jacob said about his firstborn son. He says, you are unstable as water. That's a very descriptive analogy, because we have all been in the situation where if it's just filling up the ice cube tray and trying to get that water from the sink to the refrigerator, you ever spilled it? Or a bucket and spilled it? It's just unstable. Even if you take it to a greater degree and say that river down the road there, you never know what it's going to hold. You can get on that river and it's just as calm as it can be, and then in just a little bit it can turn to disaster. So unstable as water. Is there anything more unstable as water? Maybe dynamite. Dynamite's pretty, but you get the chemicals in dynamite. It's pretty unstable. You don't want to mess with it. I guess if you make a homemade bomb, you don't want to mess with that because that'll blow up on you. But unstable as water, that's not saying anything good about your character. You don't want anybody to say of you, well, you're unstable as water, because it's basically saying you're indecisive and you can't make a decision. And sometimes life calls for you to make a decisive decision. You may be right or you may be wrong, and you may second guess it, and others may second guess it later, but at least you're making a decision. Okay, are we going or are we not? Are we advancing or are we retreating? Are we going to try to go to the right and get us some position over there? Or are we going to charge? What are we going to do? People can criticize Pickett and his charge, but at least Lee made a decision. Now, it was a disaster, but it was a decision. And Reuben just could not make a decision. You ever know anybody like that?
Oh, yeah.
You ever know anybody they just can't make a decision? And it can be very frustrating, even in yourself, if that describes you. If it's one of all of us have character flaws. If one of your character flaws is, man, I'm unstable. I'm withering in my decisions. And if that's you, then pray that the Lord will make you more decisive. Now, there's a danger in that kind of prayers. If you pray, Lord, make me more decisive, then He's going to give you opportunities to make more decisions. Right? That's the way it works. Pray for patience, expect tribulation. Pray to love more, expect more people to come into your life who are unlovable. Help me to love my enemies. Well, then expect some enemies. Right? Help me to be kind to those who are cruel to me. We'll expect some more cruelty. You know, prayer life can be a very treacherous journey, and that's why a lot of people don't pray. But have courage, have courage. And pray for those things, because you got a good God. He's not going to put on you more than you can bear. But if you're one of these, or you know somebody who's like one of these, then you know how frustrating it is. And that's why Jesus Christ should have come from Reuben. He should have. He's the firstborn. But Jesus Christ doesn't come from Reuben. It's not the tribe of Reuben. And it's not the tribe of Simeon. And it's not the tribe of Levi. It's the tribe of Judah. Right? Why? Why the tribe of Judah? Well, we already know the tribe of Reuben. Why? Indecisive. Can't make a decision. Goes, fornicates. He's just not the kind of character that's going to be. Now, are any of these guys perfect? Was Judah perfect? Oh no, we'll see. Far from perfect. He did something with his daughter-in-law he shouldn't have done. So we're not talking about people who are perfect, but we're talking about character. And we'll see something in Judah's character where the Lord goes, that's my guy. That's my guy. Not Simeon and Levi. Not Simeon and Levi. We'll find out why they're rejected next time. And then eventually through this study, we'll go through all 12 tribes. Okay? But that's Reuben tonight and the genealogy.